Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for watching this live stream. My name is Zacchino. I am the Communications and IT Manager and also a Project Manager here at Island Innovation. I have been in Island Innovation for about 4 years now, and I'm based on Margarita Island, a Caribbean island close to the coast of Venezuela. As you may already know, Island Innovation is a social enterprise and digital media company at the intersection of sustainable development and communications. We bring together the private sector, government, NGOs, and academia to advance innovation for sustainability in island communities worldwide. Island Innovation seeks to create opportunities for participation and share knowledge with stakeholders who are interested in island issues. Our team is completely remote and based in various places around the globe. We're strongly committed to helping in any way we can help the environment, raise awareness on issues such as climate change, renewable energy, and more. In light of this, we believe that getting to know our team and what we do besides our services is very important. So today I have the opportunity to discuss these and other topics with my colleague, Vincent Diringer. Vincent is a Vincent.
Hello, everyone. And hi, Christian.
Welcome. So I'm very glad to have the opportunity to host these sessions with you today and getting to know more about your background and interests. So let's start with your origins, shall we? Where are you from? Where have you lived? And where are you based now?
Of course. So I'm half French and half Fijian, and I grew up in Australia. And all of that pushed me to have a very strong interest in environmental science and marine conservation. And after my first set of studies in Australia, I worked there for a little bit before moving to Singapore and working in Malaysia and Indonesia for sustainability, conservation projects, and in environmental education. And then during that time, I realized how important communicating the importance of science and especially the environment was to the public. And I decided to then undertake a postgraduate degree in science communications in the Netherlands, which is where I'm located today.
Wonderful. Okay, sorry. I would say, now that you mentioned your studies, what was one of the favorite experiences that you had while doing your graduate and postgraduate studies?
Ooh, there was quite a few. I think they were both very, very pivotal in shaping who I am today, especially in terms of science communication. But I think there's one example that really sticks out that actually is quite recent. During my master's, I was able to undertake a research project via the Naturalis Biodiversity Center here in Leiden, and was able to write a white paper on the efficiency and best practice for artificial reefs. I've always been into coral reefs and marine conservation, so it was a huge opportunity for me to be able to contribute in that way. And I was lucky enough that that paper was actually then used by a partner organization called Coral Reef Care to create their own projects in Indonesia last year. And they reviewed their new reef sites fairly recently that were made based off the recommendations that I provided, and the area showed an increase in biodiversity, and they're quite excited for the future of that project. And so for me, it was fantastic to be able to contribute to that, and especially contribute to something I'm passionate about in such an active way.
Fantastic, and that sounds very wonderful to be able to have those experiences in different fields, and they come together at the end at one very important field for you, which is science communication. I would say it's amazing. And in lieu of that, would you say that being a science communicator is challenging?
I mean, in this context that we're currently in, yes. I don't think realistically anyone's going into science or science communication because it's easy. Science itself has unfortunately become quite political in the past few years, and that makes the conversations we have with groups and organizations or the public a bit more difficult. It adds an extra layer of challenge for us to be able to, properly communicate with these groups as to the science that's being done, the environment, or the needs that we need to communicate with them. So yeah, I think it is challenging, but it's part of the job.
Noted. Okay, so in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which we hope that it's over sometime, 3 years and counting now, but you could see some groups challenging the approach of vaccination. There are a lot of examples where, and I'm not saying this to point out anyone, but for example, religious beliefs, which are always a sensitive issue for some people, clash so much with proven scientific approaches that it would seem that one side exploited the telltales and low education to provoke automatic rejection of what was ultimately the best solution possible. Would you say that people with these beliefs that could be considered radical could be well oriented with a better science communication approach?
Oh, definitely. I think, if anything, the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted how poorly, as a whole community globally, we've done with the communication of science and medicine. And that's on par with the science and medical community, where we definitely need to do more to be able to better express ourselves and better explain what it is that science and medicine can contribute. But on the other side, I think there is also definitely a very, very fine line between education and acceptance. So as a science communicator, for example, we have to be involved with science and the medicine and the information that we are providing. And on one hand, we can only do as much as we can. So we can only communicate and provide the information to educate people about a topic, for example, the COVID vaccines. But we can't force them to take it. We can only provide them with the information and hope that we've done it in an efficient enough way that it helps them to change their own mind. I do believe that better information and effective communication can have a positive impact for communities, especially with the COVID vaccine. And with the COVID vaccine, the impact has been fairly obvious from a scientific and medical standpoint. What needs to be dispelled more is disinformation or misinformation. And that, unfortunately, is inherently more difficult to combat, especially when you have groups who don't trust scientific or medical institutions. That can be a bit more difficult, especially being able to bridge that gap and have that conversation, even though you know that they are not going to trust anything that you say inherently. But it is part of our role to be able to explain that in a way that they are able to understand, that is also not threatening in any way, shape, or form. But that's all a part of the challenge of science communication.
Fantastic, and I agree with you. We need more education, and we need it more in a way that people are able to understand it. That they could have their opinion, they could have their religious beliefs, but to avoid them clashing with science, because science is there to make our lives better, to make us healthy in this regard, and also to help the environment. For example, we are fighting climate change at this moment, and I would say that everyone has been affected by climate change, regardless of what you may think of the concept of climate change. You can see temperatures rising everywhere. We had a heat wave very strong on Europe recently. And also here in the Caribbean, we see that where it should be raining nonstop on this period of time, it's super sunny, and it's very, we even have lack of humidity sometimes, which is very uncommon in the Caribbean, where we are humid all the time. So I would say those are consequences of climate change. And when science communicators like you are providing insights on why is this happening, I would say this is important for people to get to know what is going on in our world, and how can we as global citizens help to cope with these situations, and also to try to revert them in some way, or try to lower the effects. So in this context, what would you say are the top challenges that a person like a climate change communicator face nowadays? And what is a climate change communicator?
So in short, a climate change communicator is someone who is explaining how how climate change is impacting the global community now. So taking all the research and information we have about climate change now, the models that we have, and the impacts that we're seeing currently, and explaining to people what that means for the future, the roads to a solution, and the ways to best implement that solution. And in terms of the top challenges, I think at the moment is definitely the scale of the issue. Climate change looks very differently everywhere because of the impact we've had on the environment. So as you were saying, you know, the humidity being different now in the Caribbean, the large scale heat waves we're seeing in Europe and other parts of the world as well. We've seen wildfires in Australia, seeing widespread drought across Africa. These are all problems, but for a lot of people, they have a hard time being able to piece together how that is all different parts of one giant jigsaw, that is climate change. So on one hand, you need to be able to bridge all those issues and be able to explain the scale of it without necessarily scaring people. I think when people start to understand the scale of climate change as a whole, the answer you get a lot from the public tends to be something like, oh, well, if it's so big, you know, what can we realistically do to change climate change? And, you know, the answer is quite a bit realistically. And, you know, that's on individuals, but also more on governments and organizations to be a bit more responsible in how they handle carbon emissions and the solutions towards them and curbing them. But I think the biggest issue is really being able to explain to people that the impacts of climate change are not something that is something for the future, but something that's already been happening for several decades at this point, and that has really begun to ramp up in the past couple of years. And a lot of people, especially with science communication or medical communication, when they don't want to, or they're unable to quite necessarily grasp the information that you're telling them, because it might be a bit outside of their scope, it might be something that they don't quite understand. The best way to reach out to those people is actually putting it in a way where they realize how it affects them. So, for example, one of the best classes I had when I was in Australia at James Cook was explaining to a community group what the impact of, you know, solar renewables in North Queensland, where we were. And the main idea that a lot of us had as young graduates was to tell them like, oh, well, you know, solar is great. It's fantastic. It's really good for the environment and all these other reasons because climate change. And I remember getting a lot of red pen on my copy when I got it back from my lecturer, who said like, yes, that's true, but that's not what people want to hear. At the end of the day, for someone who's living in this part of the world, they might not necessarily understand the impacts that them choosing solar might have, you know, elsewhere. What you need to tell them is something that they can relate to is, you know, the solar power is going to be cheaper than your current opportunities. This will provide you with more self-reliance. This is going to help you do X. So essentially pivoting how we view the issue of climate change being a major issue, which it is, but explaining it to people in a way that gets them to understand the problem or realistically better understand the solutions. But yeah, that's difficult as well, just in general. So it's always fun to try and find out the ways to make what we're trying to explain more accessible.
Do you think that the governments, any government in the world, and particularly island countries, are able to help cope with climate change if they have, for example, a climate change communicator on their team, on their communications team, on the environment agency? Is it something that they are in need of, instead of, you know, the usual politicians that are there and are in charge because they are politicians, they come from the legislative background, or they are sometimes majors that they are now ministers, for example, they are gaining experience, but they don't particularly would know how to communicate what is happening because it is not their background. Would you say that advisors or people that are in close contact with politicians may be able to help these countries to express what is going on in their own country because of climate change?
So yes, I think in general, there definitely is a need for more science to be involved in government, especially with the issue of climate change, and then the solutions that we need to pursue to mitigate it as much as we can. I think there has always been a bit of reluctance from the scientific side to get involved in politics in the past, because science is not supposed to be political. And on that end, I think now that science has been shifted more to a political issue, there probably is more of a need for science now to be involved, not necessarily universities or professors or things like that, but more, advisors, as you said, people who have a good grasp of the science, people who have a good grasp of the technology that is available, and people who are able to explain concisely and without any issues what are the challenges that we're facing, and here are the ways that we can fix it. I think those would be appreciated everywhere, I think, because it also helps bridge the gap between academia and government, which I think has always been a key lackluster area for a lot of policy. But I think for a lot of island governments and a lot of island communities, they definitely already have an idea of how climate change is impacting them. Realistically, islands have been on the forefront of climate change for a very long time. I don't think the climate change issue is not unknown to them. A lot of climate action and a lot of climate policy and discourse has happened on the side of islands. And especially at COP26, we saw Prime Minister Motley stand up and denounce global inaction from major economies, mostly because, the islands that are on the forefront of climate change are the ones that are dealing with the issues, but they're also the ones that are finding a lot of solutions and trying to find new ways to innovate to reach those solutions. I think, if anything, there needs to be more dialogue and collaboration between small island developing states and vulnerable communities around the world, just between them, to be able to find solutions for themselves, but also so that they can also communicate as one with larger global governments. And overall, I think science and science advisors or science communicators can definitely play a major role in that. I think there is definitely a middle ground to be achieved there.
Wonderful. I agree. Definitely, we need more and more education. It's like it's never enough. Would you say in this context that the education that we're teaching our nephews, our kids, our everywhere from the school up to high school and then universities, etc., needs to put more emphasis on science, not in the science in the concept of you have to go to the lab and study or whatever, because if it's not going to be your major, no, but the notion of science, and people could actually relate more to science if they see it every day in their education?
Yes, I think there's already been a shift, I think, in recent education to really discuss climate change more. I remember, for example, when I went to school, which was 15 years ago, we weren't really discussing climate change. I remember when An Inconvenient Truth came out, there was still a lot of skeptics, and we didn't get a real conversation about that in school. And it's been very refreshing to see a lot of youth advocacy happening at the moment, driven in part because, one, the youth has a lot more access to information than a lot of previous generations had, but also because it's being taught in schools. And I think that's fantastic. And like you said, there's no such thing as too much education, realistically. And in terms of getting more people into science, I think introducing them to science definitely should be done. And I think showing that there is a bit more of a wide range of things in science apart from biology, chemistry, or physics, which is the three main things that you tend to be taught in school. I think there's definitely in different places been changes to the education structure for more science to be added. But I think I would go one step further and go, like, it's not necessarily science that we need to be in touch with more. It's nature. So it's very hard to convince people to change their ways to protect, say, nature if they haven't themselves really experienced it. So obviously the people who are fighting on the front lines, whether it's in island states or coastal communities, vulnerable communities, they're a lot more in touch with nature. They can see it happening before their very eyes, which is why for them it's a lot more passionate and a lot more emotional to want to go for change, which arguably is the inverse for people in larger economies and things like that who maybe don't have the ability to interact with nature the way that we do. And I think on that end, it's a lot better, it's a lot easier to communicate a scientific or an environmental aspect to someone if you're in the environment with them. If you're in a rainforest or if you're on a coral reef and you're explaining to them just how important, you know, this patch of rainforest is, this patch of coral reef is, and why it's so important that we have this diversity of fish, or explaining to them just how important it is to have a primary rainforest instead of a secondary rainforest. Once people see it and once people can interact with it, I think it creates an entirely different attachment to things. And I think it was Sir David Attenborough who said that people won't care for things unless they've had an interaction with them. And it is very true. Science is definitely one way down the pathway to get people more in touch with science. But I think, yeah, we definitely need to rethink a lot how we interact with nature.
Definitely. And I also have another question for you, Vincent. In this context of sustainable development goals, which are very important to get our world a better place and cope with the effects of climate change, and also being able to provide more education, better health services and visibility for small communities, and also for minorities around the globe. Do you believe that science communicators can help people understand the SDGs?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, the SDGs and the UN, I think, have done a very good job when they crafted the SDGs of explaining or putting it into context that everyone can understand. So all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals have their own targets. And each of those targets, when you look into them, are specific enough so that when you are communicating them to people, it really highlights core issues within, or core solutions or core goals that people want to move towards with the Sustainable Development Goals. So whether that's better education, and then they'll tell you where they want the better education and how to monitor and see where how the better education is happening in specific fields. And I think that's very important because it helps make something a bit more tangible, especially with the monitoring and being able to see the impact that you're having. And I think on the second hand, it makes it a lot easier for science communicators to be able to take the Sustainable Development Goals and explain them to communities and be like, this is why we are moving towards sustainability. For a lot of people, it's true that sustainability is a bit of a buzzword. You're not going to be able to necessarily understand what it means. But thanks to the SDGs, you're able to show them like, right, okay, we want to create more gender equality, and this is how we want to do it, and this is how we can do it within your community. And based off of these goals already and targets that the United Nations has provided for us. I think, yeah, it's a very useful guideline, and I think it's one that we should definitely be working to enact as quickly as possible.
Great, fantastic. So in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, we should mention that we have the 4th edition of the Virtual Island Summit coming up in the last week of September. And all of the content tracks that this event has in place are strongly tied with the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is something that here at Island Innovation, it's one of our core themes. We support the Sustainable Development Goals. And as you will be able to see now on our screen, we are going to make a mention of the core themes or tracks that we are using this year for the Virtual Island Summit. Starting with climate action and adaptation, it's going to cover COP27, climate justice, net zero, the sustainable island small island development states, and mitigation. And the second theme will be renewable energy and clean energy transition. Which topics are those covering, Vincent?
These topics that we're going to be looking into during the VIS will be financing the energy transition and access to affordable energy, smart and sustainable cities, energy efficiency, clean transportation, as well as net zero.
Wonderful. And then we would have blue economy, conservation, and the ocean. Which topics is that covering?
Sustainable aquaculture, sustainable fisheries, plastic pollution, marine plastics, as well as ocean ecosystem preservation, maritime transport and shipping, conservation, nature-based solutions, biodiversity, as well as forestry management and restoration.
Then we would have health, education, diversity, and inclusion, which is going to cover future leaders of sustainability. We are going to also have a youth sessions where youth leaders are going to come along. We always do this at the Virtual Island Summit to have youth leaders. We always give them a voice so they can say what it's on their minds and what are their projects. We're also going to cover affordable, inclusive, and quality education, human rights, cultural preservation, indigenous communities, female empowerment, the LGBTQ+ community, and no poverty. And then we are going to have the agriculture, trade, and food security track. What is going to cover there?
So this track will be focusing on nutrition, livestock and sustainability, agri-tech, trade, as well as food sovereignty.
Then we have circular economy. What is going to be covered there?
So with the circular economy track, there's going to be more talks regarding waste and recycling, plastic pollution, as well as sustainable products.
And then we have sustainable tourism, which is a very, very, very light topic for most of us here at Island Innovation and close to our hearts. Those of us who live on touristic destinations like my island. We're going to cover digital nomads, responsible tourism, cultural preservation, economic development, and remote work as well. And then we are going to finish off with blockchain and cryptocurrency. What is going to be covered there, Vincent?
So with blockchain and crypto, we're going to be looking at the access to finance as well as sustainable currencies.
Very important topics that we're going to be covering at the Virtual Island Summit. Which one of these tracks, Vincent, would you say interests you the most? All of them? It's a good answer as well.
I mean, they're all great and incredibly interesting, and I'm really looking forward to listening to as many as I can. But I think that the main ones for me are definitely going to be the first and third one, which were climate adaptation, as well as blue economy. I think that those are the two I'm going to be having my eyes on the most.
And we're going to have very interesting sessions on those tracks. So you can also visit the website, www.virtualislandsummit.com. You can register, it's entirely free, and you will have access to all of the sessions. And also, if you can watch them live, you are going to be able to watch them on demand on our website. And we're also going to be sending daily emails, reminders for the sessions, and information about these sessions that we're going to be having, the speakers that we're going to be on each of these sessions, and more information. So please do visit the website virtualislandsummit.com, and you are going to find a lot of information there. So with this, I want to thank you, Vincent. This has been a pleasure, a wonderful session that we were able to host today. So many important topics were covered, and it was great to get to know more of you. We always work together and have these things about work, but it's good to also know what is outside of the work scope and what are your interests and the commitment that you have to making our world better, because I think it's what drives us every day to do what we do.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. It was a fantastic chat, and yeah, thanks again for having it with me.
Thank you so much. So thank you everyone that watched this session live. The recording is going to be available right after on all of our social media channels. And don't forget to visit us at www.virtualislandsummit.com and also islandinnovation.co. See you next time.